This will be recorded. We hope that you will stay with us for the entire duration, but if you have to go, totally understand. This is the middle of a lot of people's workday. But if you do have questions, please add them to the either the chat box or the question and answer box, whatever is easier for you to navigate. And we will do our best. We have some incredible panelists here today with a lot to share. So we may have to have some further conversations in the future to answer all those questions. But we will begin now. So thank you so much for joining us for Understanding Homelessness in the Forest City. I'm Jenna Goodhand. I'm the director of the Hive London, and I am blown away by the response that we have had to this event. We've had more than 350 people respond to attend, and that's remarkable. And it also says a lot about our needs and our wants and our sense of compassion towards these issues. Before we begin today, I think it's really important to acknowledge the land that we're on in southwestern Ontario for many reasons, not just because of the colonial impacts and the devastation that's happened to our Indigenous communities, but we're talking about homelessness today. And since settlers arrived here, we have taken the homes of Indigenous people. And I think that it's really important that we think about that today as we're talking about what a home really means, what land means, and that we take our initiatives of reconciliation and relationships further than just acknowledging land, but in doing something about it. And so in being here today, we hope that this is an opportunity to begin to do something more in that regard. Danielle DeSutter is here with me today. She is a student, an intern of the Hive from Fanshawe College, a social service worker. You may have received emails from her at numerous times. She will also be helping guide our conversation today. Thank you, Danielle. This is a much bigger endeavor than we thought we signed her up for. So thank you for your patience in everything that we do today. Our intentions for today's event likely will not be to solve homelessness in our community. That would be great, and maybe we're on our way there. But it's to lead with a better understanding of the diversities of experiences that people have when they are challenged with homelessness. And so we reached out to a number of different experts, organizations in the community that have various degrees of experience, but also knowledge and understanding of how different groups experience homelessness, in order that we can come to better understand what others are going through, to have more compassion, to offer better supports and resources, and to really understand what exists in the community and how we can help to navigate those spaces for others. We would like to take a moment to just thank our sponsors as well. When we set out to do this event, we had no idea about the interest of it. And along the way, we were able to find some sponsors to help us upgrade our technology. So thank you to Iceberg Digital Marketing, our gold sponsor, and Amy and Emma Mortgages, Jennifer Slay, coaching and consulting, and my landscape artist, Heather Gerard, for your donations. They helped us to upgrade the system that we're on right now, as well as the reach of people who could attend. Danielle will be kicking off the speaker portion of the event, and we're going to start by thanking someone very special. Michelle is here today from 519. She's probably the courageous face that you saw if you saw any of the videos that we posted earlier. She was brave enough to share her story of successes and triumph and all the work that she's doing now. So we thought it would be great to just begin today's conversation, to kind of give the floor to Michelle. Danielle, if you want to introduce her.
Yes, so like Jenna had mentioned, Michelle has been working with 519 Pursuit since summer of 2019. She didn't stop there. She's also volunteering with many different organizations. Some of those organizations are Project Hope, The Sanctuary, and Arcade Mission. She also started becoming the lead volunteer with 519 Pursuit in 2020 of January. Just recently, Michelle was employed with Wish as well. So like Jenna had mentioned, thank you so much for being brave and telling your story. I know that many people, the only reason that they came today was because they saw your face and they got interested. So thank you, Michelle, from the bottom of our hearts. That's very, very kind and courageous of you.
Of course, you're welcome.
We'd also like to offer each panelist an opportunity to speak to why homelessness is important in their area of expertise or in their organization. So as we introduce you, we'll give a brief bio, and then if you want to take a minute to kind of share anything that kind of comes to mind as it relates to your focus. We will obviously get deeper into the question portion of this, but this will give us and attendees a sense of where we're going today. So Andrea Jib, you are first up. So Andrea is Michif Anshnabe Kwe, who currently resides in London, Ontario with her children. As the Director of Community Planning at Atlosa Family Healing Services, Andrea oversees the operations of Atlosa's Homelessness Division, including the Atlosa Resting Space, Street Outreach, supportive housing, and housing stability programs. These programs are rooted in the Giwitashakad Indigenous Homelessness Strategy, based on a vision for bringing people home through Indigenous-led programs and services informed by Indigenous knowledge. Andrea, welcome, and we would love to hear a little bit about why it's important to you to look at homelessness through the lens of Indigenous people.
Miigwech, Jenna, for the opportunity to speak today and bring us all together on this really important issue for our community. So I'll start by introducing myself in the Ojibwe language. So Bojo Nindanawe Maganadog, Jawananganimki Kwe Indigenikas, Nimki Benesi and Nodem, Michifanish Kwe Indao, Miskos Gimizi being in Donjiba. And so I introduced myself by sharing my spirit name, my clan, my nation, and where I'm from. And so this is often a way that we as Indigenous peoples introduce ourselves when we gather, and it's to help situate who we are in relation to the world around us, who we are in relationship to spirit, what our nations are and what our clans are and where we live. And so, as you said, my work over the last few years has been involved with doing the Giwitashkad Indigenous Homelessness Plan for London, Ontario. And the reason why we started to do this work is because there is a significant overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples experiencing homelessness in our community. And so the last point in time count for the City of London showed that at least 29% of folks who were experiencing homelessness identified as Indigenous, whereas Indigenous people, according to the most recent census data, make up about 2% of. So that's a big deal, and we see these kind of numbers all across Canada, and the reason why we're seeing these significant overrepresentations is because we have to understand Indigenous homelessness in a very specific context, and that context is colonization. So there was an original displacement of Indigenous peoples from land 500 years ago, and Indigenous peoples are still experiencing those forms of displacement, although they definitely look different today in some ways, and in some ways they look the same. So that's kind of what I'm here today to speak to. And again, miigwech for the opportunity.
Thank you, Andrea. We are so honored and grateful to have you here with us. Next, I'd like to go to Lena. So Lena Burton is with YOU. She's been working full-time as the housing liaison for the Housing First for Youth team with Youth Opportunities Unlimited since 2019. Lena helps secure housing by reaching out to landlords, maintaining existing landlord relationships, and providing experiential advice to the housing stability workers attached to youth. And a big win, since the pandemic began, Lena has housed 32 youth. Amazing work, Lena. Thank you for being here with us. What can you shed on us in terms of youth and its relationship to homelessness?
Hi, thanks for having me. So youth experience homelessness in a distinct way separate from adults. Not that it doesn't overlap. I think in general, youth is a flexible term depending on who you talk to. For our agency, we consider youth really anywhere between 16 and 25, transitional age youth in relation to housing, but then up to 29 in relation to employment and education, because in North America, we have this really interesting space of extended adolescence. And so just as the brain and humans develop, it actually doesn't just stop at 18. You're not a magical adult. And so youth experience homelessness in a unique way that's often considered to be hidden. They're part of like the hidden homeless population, where generally they're not presenting at emergency shelters as much. Often it's couch surfing. It might not even be that young folks identify themselves as experiencing homelessness because they're staying with a friend or popping around or sharing places with other folks, but it puts them at a unique risk a lot of times because it's difficult for young people to find housing of their own. They've never been in charge of a household before. And a lot of times for young people, the entrance into homelessness is as a result of abuse or trauma in the home or an exit from the care system. And so in a way that's different from some adults that experience homelessness, the young folks have really never had the opportunity to be the head of a household. They've never ran their own household. And so it's a very completely different experience based on their own developmental stages and opportunities to express themselves as an adult and live as an adult. So YOU, over its time in the city, has really expanded and initially started mostly as employment and education, which we still offer, of course. And then as the growing need was identified that actually there's a lot of youth experiencing homelessness, sleeping outdoors, sleeping with friends, ending up in even more precarious situations related to human trafficking, that there was this huge need in our community for housing services for youth. And as we worked with more housing services for youth, we realized, holy moly, there's a lot of need for this, which was resulted in the opening of our Housing First youth shelter this last summer. And so we just work from a perspective that youth do experience sort of like homelessness differently and require different services that are a bit more specialized and tailored to development, skill building, and working from a trauma-informed space. I think I covered it.
That was great. Thank you so much, Lena. I'm looking forward to learning more as we get into today about some of those things that you touched on. Next, we have Anthea Williams. Anthea, your bio was the best part of my day so far. We might have had to limit it a little bit, but I hope that this brings a fun flicker to our day today. Anthea identifies as a gender pirate, challenging the gender binary while breathing and living in a sea of white that is London, Ontario. The visuals for this are phenomenal. Thank you. Anthea was raised by lesbians, biracial, and straddling margins. Loves learning and exploring, as well as pushing boundaries, agitating comfort levels consensually and reciprocally. QTPOC activist seeking earnest change in the world. Anthea has been working in the social service field for over 10 years, navigating and shaking up the system to support vulnerable populations. They've swam from the domestic violence sector to Indigenous-led movements for change, to reducing harm for individuals impacted by substance use and generational poverty. And I'd probably add, you're likely a poet based on this bio. Welcome, thank you so much for being here. You are welcome to represent whatever you want. Your angle.
Yeah, my lived experience straddles a lot of different margins. I started in the VAW sector, so I started against violence against women sector, which obviously too, I did a lot of work shining the light on women's homelessness and how it looked differently than what was a lot of the services were out there for. And now I think I've moved in. This is for queer and trans people of color and how that works. So working at Unity Project, one of the first shelters to outwardly be open and accept trans inclusive people for you to self-identify, whatever gender or so. And then moving into at LOSA, doing a lot of work with Indigenous folks and populations dealing with homelessness and other kinds of social issues. So it's been a beautiful thing to take my lived experience and my activism work and my community work and apply that to systems navigation around homelessness, support services, mental health, and things like that.
Awesome.
To make my introduction less
Awesome. Thank you. We have Jeff Preston next, and I don't know, Jeff, if you can hear us. I don't know why I can't see you, but we will figure this out. Sorry, I know how frustrating this can be. I'm not sure why we can't see or hear you. Okay, Jeff, if you want to type in the chat, maybe what you're experiencing on your side, we can move on to Allison. And then we can sort that out. So Allison is here from 519 Pursuits. If you have been following anything on the issues of homelessness in the city, you've probably seen a big truck of socks show up on your newsfeed at some point. Allison is the co-founder of 519 Pursuits alongside her best friend, Amber. In 2017, a simple crock pot of chicken noodle soup turned their basement into a clothing recycling program for friends in the city. 519 Pursuit is a grassroots nonprofit organization that focuses on friendship-based approach when connecting with and walking alongside those facing homelessness and extreme poverty. In 2019, 519 Pursuit was a recipient of the Pillar Nonprofit Community Choice Award. Congratulations. And since then has expanded to a storage facility where 2 storage lockers are accessed by volunteers. With on board of 50 plus individuals, helping hands on a partnership with the London Food Bank and the chefs at the RBC Place, 3 active outreach routes are being traveled with hot lunches and care packages 6 days a week. Allison has been taking a backseat working on the program over last year on maternity leave. Congratulations also for that. And is excited to return this spring hands-on. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you. And thank you for having Michelle and I here to represent 519 Pursuit. I just wanted to touch base on who we are and what we do. So we focus on a friendship-based approach, and we currently have, what Jenna said, 3 outreach teams that are going in the streets every day for 2 to 3 hours and connecting with folks who are sleeping rough or not accessing shelter. With our partnership with the London Food Bank and the RBC Place, we are delivering 500 meals a day, whether that be to the wish sites, to the hotels where folks are staying, or directly on the street. We focus solely on a friendship-based approach. With that, we meet folks where they are in the community, and we hope to reconnect them with services or shelters that are open for them and try to get them back inside and back on kind of a positive track for themselves with a friend beside them.
Okay, thank you so much, Allison. We did figure out our technical situation. Jeff, can you hear me? And can I hear you?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, welcome.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Let me just find our bio for you. So, Jeff Preston, you are an assistant professor of disability services at King's College here in London, and teach classes on disability, popular culture, and policy. You are a longtime advocate and motivational speaker, focusing on the intersection of disability, subjectivity, biopower, and culture. And you are a published author, The Fantasy of Disability, which was published in 2016. Welcome, thank you for being here. Our first question is really just to get a sense of why, from your perspective or your experience or expertise, should we be looking at homelessness?
Sure, absolutely. I think that when we think about disability, a major problem is that we often don't think about disability whatsoever, that we presume that everybody is what we would define as normal, and that those who are not normal are therefore obviously being taken care of. We live in Canada, we have universal health care, quote unquote, a lot of air quotes and sarcasm here from me to start off, so off to a good start. And the reality, I think, for a lot of people with disabilities is that homelessness and precarity in housing is a critical issue in part because there are very, very few places that are accessible to live in this city, irregardless of whether or not you have access to resources. Speaking myself personally, it took me almost 2.5 years to find a place that was actually going to physically work for me as an electric wheelchair user. And that is with being an assistant professor working full time. The reality is a lot of friends of mine with disabilities are facing huge barriers, both financial in terms of actually being able to access houses that are, or housing that they're able to afford, with ODSP having basically requiring people to live in poverty if you're on the program, or if you're kicked off the program, then having access to a lot of the medical benefits that come with it. But then, of course, when we start to build accessible housing, or when we start building housing, we often forget to make it accessible. So there are a fair number of people in London who are currently either in houses that are not actually accessible for them, meaning that they're not able to really get out of their home. They're able to get in, but maybe not out because of lack of access to elevators, lack of access to doorways that are the right size for their equipment. If you're moving into an apartment, you also then need the resources to change the apartment to make it work for you accessibly. If you have those resources, you may not even actually get approval to do it. A lot of condo owners, a lot of rental owners do not allow you to do the types of changes you need to make. So what happens is people are stuck in either not great situations or are simply not able to find anything whatsoever. They find themselves trapped. So I think that we need to really think carefully about the ways in which we are enforcing either homelessness or non-ideal situations on people, purely because we're thinking about housing in one very specific way.
Thank you. I really appreciate you being with us here today and giving this perspective that definitely sounds as though it's been unaddressed so far. Thank you. Next, we have Sarah Collins from Center of Hope, Salvation Army. Sarah is the program director for the Salvation Army Center of Hope and has worked for the center for the past 11 years with experience in emergency shelter and many other programs that provide supports and services the community needs. Sarah is currently a steering committee member for the London Homeless Coalition and is part of many other committees and networks across the London region that work to support homeless populations in London. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being with us today.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's great to be here and talk about this very important topic in London right now and everywhere. But I think kind of introducing myself, and there's many different programs that we offer at the Salvation Army London Center of Hope. And so many people may know us for having emergency shelter and transitional rooms, but we also try to interrupt someone's homelessness before they get there with things such as our food bank or our housing stability bank, and providing other services there so that hopefully we can divert them from ending up homeless at that time. So I'm a firm believer in kind of that we're there to meet people's needs at their time of need and providing them with a hand up. It's not a handout, and to assisting those to find and secure housing within the community that is affordable and safe for them. So thank you again for having me.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just going to make a note here about something I think would be great for us to go into there. Next, we have Elizabeth, and she's here from the London Abused Women's Centre. She is a counselor and advocate at the centre and has worked as an outreach worker and a housing stability worker with London Cares as a traditional case manager with CMHA Middlesex at My Sister's Place. Throughout her career, Elizabeth has been passionate about understanding and advocating for the unique housing needs of women in our community. Elizabeth finds joy and ease spending time in nature and with her loved ones, including 3 cats. Welcome. Thank you for being here, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm here on behalf of London Abused Women's Centre. We provide counseling and advocacy to women and girls over the age of 12 who have been subjected to intimate partner violence and abuse, sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, and non-state torture. So we provide feminist-based and trauma-informed counseling and advocacy, and often we are helping with housing matters, although we're a small team and there's a lot. I can't think of hardly any woman who I'm not connecting with who doesn't have housing instability or precarity or facing potential homelessness. So I think it's important for us to talk about homelessness with an intersectional gendered analysis and to have that included. And, you know, so for a lot of women who are facing violence, the largest barrier to being able to leave that situation is not having quick or easy access to housing, safe and affordable housing. Also, when people are finding themselves in the state of homelessness, women and gender diverse people are experiencing very high rates of violence and also higher rates of sex trafficking. And yeah, we're just hoping to raise the issue for women, especially women who are women-led mothers of a household. So their unique needs are, you know, they're having difficulty meeting those in the system that we have currently. Their needs are very unique, and yeah, and I think Indigenous women suffer some of the most egregious challenges in terms of lack of housing and are very much underserved in both violence against women and homelessness services as they stand now. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being here and the work that you do. Last but not least, we have Michelle, who we heard from at the very beginning there, but we want to say a little bit about Michelle, and Michelle, there's an opportunity for you to share sort of where you want to take this conversation today as well. So Michelle began volunteering with 509 Pursuit in the summer of 2019. And since then, she has become a crucial member of the team there. In January of 2020, she became a lead volunteer, and she also volunteers with Project Hope, Sanctuary, and the Arcade Mission. And she, as mentioned, now works at Wish, where she was hired as a community support worker and has quickly been promoted to shift supervisor. Congratulations, Michelle. Thank you for being here. It's been a busy couple of years for you. We're here to gain a better understanding of homelessness. And we would love to know what sorts of things you think we should be bringing to the conversation that aren't being had.
I guess just from my perspective, 14 months ago, you know, I was homeless on the streets for 2.5 years, the streets of London. So I know there's a lot of stigma behind it. There's a lot of hurt, you know, how many times I would be spit on or I'd be bawling my eyes out and nobody would stop to even ask me how I'm doing, you know. It was that real build in friendship and you know, because I never felt like I truly had people who cared about me as a person. And, you know, for that reason, I didn't care about myself. I didn't feel like I deserved any better. And it truly was that bringing together of a friendship and somebody coming visiting me continuously to show me that, you know, I am worth it. You know, I had a flesh-eating virus, and I was so lucky that, you know, one of the services that that the Salvation Army has is detox. And through detox and through the RCC that the Salvation Army actually also has, you know, I was better to have a spot where I could work on myself and I could become the woman that I wanted to be. So I think it's just having those resources available, you know, because as many times as I want to get out of the street and I wanted to stop using, I would always be thrown back out to the wolves, right? And so I really think those resources and the stigma behind homelessness is something that I would love, you know, to have be brought up. So that's my little portion. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We hope you'll stay with us for any questions later as well. Okay, Danielle, I will pass it over to you for our next segment of questions here.
Unmute myself here. All right, so thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy days, and thank you for all the beautiful work that you do in our community. As Jenna had mentioned before, one of our aims today is to understand how homelessness affects various segments of the population differently. So Andrea, starting with you, can you shed some light on the ways in which Indigenous people have their own unique challenges when it comes to finding themselves in the situation of homelessness, and also how to navigate to get to a safe place, sustainable and supportive housing? Yeah, I'd just like to hear from that perspective first.
For sure, Miigwech Danielle. So homelessness for Indigenous people, it looks different from homelessness in general. And so much of the work that we did through the Giwatashkat Indigenous Homelessness Plan was inspired by the definition of Indigenous homelessness, which was written by Jesse Thistle, who is a Métis Cree academic and now best-selling author of his story of lived experience of being Métis and homeless. So when we talk about the definition of Indigenous homelessness, we come back to the context of Indigenous homelessness needing to be understood within the history and ongoing colonization. And so, as I mentioned in my intro, Indigenous people have been historically displaced from land, and that displacement continues through different forms of homelessness today. And sometimes it very much looks like displacement from land. So Indigenous peoples through the history of colonization have experienced things such as the Indian Act, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited people, the 60s and ongoing millennial scoop. And so Indigenous people have continued to experience various forms of colonization that have contributed directly to the epidemic of Indigenous homelessness that we see today. And so we've been experiencing homelessness for a really, really long time. And so that's where we get the really high rates in our communities. And that's why we need unique solutions to Indigenous homelessness, because home for Indigenous peoples must be understood in that greater context of relationships. And so if you heard my introduction, when I introduced myself in the Ojibwe language, when we do our introductions, we're introducing ourselves in relationship to spirit, to our communities, to our extended families, and to our nations. And through the processes of colonization, have targeted those very relationships and tried to disintegrate them. And so while Indigenous people, we have maintained those relationships, and Indigenous people experiencing homelessness have incredible levels of strength and resiliency and cultural connection. Solutions towards Indigenous homelessness need to take this into account. And so this is where Indigenous-led and culture-based approaches are absolutely essential to alleviating Indigenous homelessness in London.
Wow, thank you. That's very informative. Jeff, I pose the same question towards you. Could you, I know you already touched on this a little bit, but can you shed some light on the unique challenges that individuals with disabilities experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we take a high level view of housing and disability, we really see barriers in kind of three main buckets. We see barriers in policy, we see barriers in financial access, and we see barriers in attitudes, really. So, you know, what will surprise perhaps many that are listening today is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, an act which says that Ontario will be fully accessible by 2025. Spoiler alert, we're not going to make it. But despite that, the AODA doesn't actually have anything to do with what would be termed private residences. What that means is that every day that we build new houses, new apartments, new condos right here in London, there is no regulation that states that those units must be accessible, or what accessible would even necessarily look like. You know, we have these two sort of perceptions in our world, that there are human needs, human rights, which we have things like the building code, which says that, you know, ceilings have to be a certain height and doorways and stairs have to be a certain way to be safe and to be accessible. Those are things seen as obvious rights or needs. But when it comes to disability, we often have special needs. We have these things like ramp access, feature. We think that disabled people have these sort of different, excessive, and therefore acceptable to be discriminated against needs. That's a huge, huge problem. But we also have other policies here in London. For instance, we have a policy that group homes cannot be in close proximity to one another to try and prevent clustering of disabled people and people that are coming out of the criminal justice system. What that means is that neighborhoods regularly will use this policy to resist the building of group homes that are accessible within their area, to say, no, we have too many of these accessible disabled houses in our area. And look no further to the resistance to sidewalks, active measures to try and prevent disabled people from entering into communities and safely navigating within housing in our community. I think the financial barriers, I would imagine, are probably fairly obvious when it comes to things like ODSP, only offering a little over $1,000 for a single person here in London. That's really not enough when it comes to rent. We have major, really low employment rates for people with disabilities, tied in part to stigma, but also into the inaccessibility of workplaces. People assuming that disabled people are not able to function within a workplace that'll be too expensive for them to be there, and therefore they pass over their resumes. It took me over 100 resumes to get my first job. And the only reason I was hired was because the woman doing the hiring had done an internship with me previously. She knew me and pulled my resume out of the pile. And there's just no funding when it comes to making places accessible. The last little thing I think that we really, really need to think about critically when we talk about accessibility is not thinking just about the physical access, but the ways that attitudinal barriers are also preventing people from getting access, especially stigma around mental illness. The ways in which people with mental illness are thought to be dangerous, are thought to be precarious, unreliable, bad tenants, and are then routinely passed over for opportunities. None of that is, of course, true. These are all myths of disability and myths of mental illness that I think we need to be very intentional about the ways that we tackle them.
Thank you very much. I know I personally just learned a lot there. Athena, would you like to speak to the LGBTQ2S plus side of things?
Yeah, sure. I think all the panelists who've gone before me have speak to, like, we're talking about the issue of homelessness, but legitimately speaking, it's a symptom of systemic oppression, of colonialization, of foundational ways in which our society has been constructed on the belief that one person's lived experience is the standard, which then erases anyone else's experience. And this is what we're doing in this conversation, is realizing that the diversity of our population as human beings is so brilliant and beautiful, but also not seen. So representation here really matters foundationally, in the sense of combating redlining legislation that pocket people of racialized experience into certain areas, which causes the exact same thing that Jeff was talking about, the non-clustering of populations in certain areas, for demystifying your like societal fears of those people who are different, right? The same thing happens with LGBT, like trans and queer folk. There's an idea attached to what we are, and largely stemmed from believing that queer and trans people have mental health issues. Their gender dysphoria, their lived experience of who they are, their gender and sexuality is informed by mental health issues, which has a lot of fear that you have to destigma and you have to inform. And it also puts us at higher rates of not having access to jobs, not having access to education. And even me, who has 3 jobs, who's been working in this field forever, have been destabilized in housing for the last 5 years, being evicted from places and not knowing whether or not I would meet a landlord who wouldn't react to my physicality, my racialized identity, my queerness, my transness. And so it just it highlights the barriers, and it highlights the very operating mechanisms of colonialism and racism and systemic racism on an individual and on populations. And so I think this panel is awesome to have this opportunity to talk about that and how we can combat it individually, and also how we can try and change these laws and these policies to assist those who are most erased.
Beautifully said. Thank you. I'm going to hand this off to Jenna now.
Thank you. This has been such a wealth of information and insight, and the intersectionality of everything is just very palpable in this conversation. And I hope that that's something that we can even get deeper into, maybe beyond this conversation today. Michelle, there's people here today who may have never experienced homelessness or chronic homelessness or the situations that you've had. And they are probably here because they feel some sense of compassion or, pull to want to do better and be better to people who have been in that situation. What are some things that you would like us to know or hear from you, having been on the other side? You did mention a few, terrible things that you've experienced. What are some things maybe that you did experience that were positive or were helpful from the general public? And what are some things that you would like to kind of, put an end to, or that we here today can help put an end to as it relates to the relationship between those who are experiencing homelessness and the public who has a misunderstanding of what that's about?
Personally, I would say just don't be so quick to judge. I would be on the corner of Dundas and Wellington, and I would be freezing cold, or I hadn't taken a shower in 4 or 5 days, and I just looked the part, and I would get judged all the time right away. I would get these looks, I would get these judgments, and people would say some of the cruelest things that I have ever heard. That you wouldn't say to your daughter or your mother or your parent, but you would say to someone you have no idea who they are and what their story is on the street. So yeah, that was really hard. I just felt so embarrassed for myself, but I was so stuck in that rut that it was impossible for me to get out of. And honestly, the biggest thing that helped me, the biggest thing, was Allison and Amber from 519 Pursuit. At one point, I had built a little box fort and I was staying out in the freezing cold, and they just came and said hi to me, and every time my stuff would get stolen continuously, they'd always have a duffel bag filled with clothing that they knew that I would love. It started to become that friendship that I needed them in my life. So, when they couldn't make it out to me, I would walk to them. I would get on the bus to get to them because I needed that friendship, and it just meant so much to me, having somebody that I could trust, because being out on the streets, I had nobody that I could trust. You literally would have to sleep with your backpack under your head because it would get stolen from you. So, just friendship, just starting that conversation, even offering to if they want to go for lunch, just being that helping hand for somebody makes a huge difference.
Thank you. Allison, I have a question for you. You've spent extensive time offering hands-on support to those with challenges of homelessness. Famously with like the sock collection, that's something that really I think a lot of people are aware of. Can you speak to the importance of socks specifically, and why that's sort of become, connected to 519 Pursuit, and maybe some other basic necessities for those who spend significant time without shelter?
Yeah, so we started the 519 Pledge for Socks 3 years ago. It was an initiative to kind of gather the community leading into the winter months to change the conversation around homelessness and the stigma. And when we can think about how kind of a general, fresh, clean pair of socks could change somebody's day, then maybe we can look a little deeper as a person in the community and see what else we could offer. Being homeless, Michelle can probably speak to this as well. Having a fresh, clean pair of socks is very important. Not only are you usually on your feet all day, going place to place, if you don't have funding for a bus, just to get your things done, whether it's appointments, meetings, and trying to just get housing again, a fresh, clean pair of socks could completely change somebody's day. We can see it right now as we're changing through the seasons. We just got a lot of snow, and now we're going to get some warmer weather. We're going to have slushy sidewalks and kind of melting snow and freezing snow. And having a pair of socks and walking through that, and then not having the opportunity to even know when your next clean pair of socks, or to sit down in a warm area and just air out your feet, your skin does start to get a little pruny. It can lead to not only frostbite, but a lot of pain and discomfort to walk forward with blistering. So with the 519 Pledge, we really use that as a way to kind of change the conversation, as most people would think of homeless folks and those facing homelessness to be okay to fend for themselves throughout the summer. But then when the winter months come, we really kind of buckle down and say, oh, we have this many homeless people. We need to get them inside out of the cold. Whereas it should be a year-round conversation for the community as a whole. Also, the basic needs and kind of the clothing care packages that we offer, like Michelle was saying, we find it important to not only meet folks where they are, but to also find out who they are, past homelessness, past stigma, past whatever fears there might be. Once we learn who that person is, it's fun, but it's also kind of rewarding to be able to show up to them and say, you know, we just got 20 bags of donations and I found these 5 exact things that just spoke to me that were just for you. And we can show up and kind of start at the bare minimum of building that person up as who they are, then we can look to do more positive things within the day. But it starts with comfort and being able to kind of get up and look the part, to be accepted in our community and in these doors that we're trying to walk back through to get housing.
Beautiful. I love it. Sarah, in our research, when we were looking, I mean, I would say I came to this topic very new and naive and unknowing myself about homelessness, which is why, you know, we thought we would put this together. But I realized that the challenges of homelessness are much more than just finding housing. It's not just about having enough housing for people who don't have somewhere to go. Can you speak to the factors that we may or may not be aware of that are part of the bigger challenge of people having safe, sustainable, secure, fitting, supportive housing? What else is going on in the issue that's not just about having a home?
So yeah, outside of the lack of affordable housing in London, the housing crisis that we all have heard much about, there's not one reason, there's not one factor, right? There's many. Everyone has a unique story, a unique journey, and whether that's through substance use disorder, or whether that's through a breakdown in family and relationships, past traumas, mental health. I mean, there's so many different reasons why someone will end up homeless, or and part of our services are trying to kind of interrupt that someone becoming homeless. And so whether that's providing them with food so that they can pay their rent, but also have something to eat every day, whether that's helping them keep the hydro and the gas and the water on by paying their utility arrears, or by paying their rental arrears, like by providing kind of grants and loans through the Housing Stability Bank. There's many different, there's not just one way to look at why someone would end up homeless, and everyone's kind of journey through homelessness, and kind of back what Allison had said, kind of walking back through those doors, everyone's journey looks different.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Lena, as you are listening to the responses here, how is the youth perspective or your experience with the youth kind of coming up? Are there ways in which it very much is showing very similar things? Or as you spoke to earlier, you know, for youth, they likely have never been in charge. So what sort of things are kind of coming to you that we can be made aware of?
I think everyone that's on the panel has touched on things that overlap with youth homelessness. Obviously, LGBTQ plus youth are overrepresented in youth homelessness, and are disproportionately subjected to abuse and trauma as a result of becoming homeless, but also, sometimes it's a result of family breakdown over their sexuality or gender identity, where they've been essentially kicked out. And I think, and again, like racialized youth also are overrepresented in homelessness. A lot of it also overlaps with the care system. So the child welfare system, as much as, like, you know what I mean? There's times where for safety people need this, but it does disproportionately affect racialized people experiencing poverty. And then once they're in the care system, there's what's referred to as the service cliff for youth. So youth, essentially that go into care are taken care of ideally, or they're placed in housing placements like foster homes, group homes, but then there is an abrupt end to that. And so there's this huge cluster of people through no fault of their own who suddenly have no access to services that they've really relied on for a number of years. And so for those folks, it's also very tough because I think people sometimes forget how much help most people get when they're moving out for the first time by choice. Is just for a lot of people in the general public who are fortunate enough to have like family supports, both extended family and immediate family. For a lot of folks, when they get their first place, it's planned. That's a huge one. So it's not this chaotic situation, this traumatic situation where you've been uprooted against your will without a choice and thrust into the position of adult, right? Where suddenly you've been taken care of, or at least been able to depend on someone for that. And suddenly it's like, oh, what do you mean you don't know how to pay bills? What do you mean you don't know how to get your own ID? What do you mean you don't have a bank account? These are a lot of things people take for granted. And for young people, that's difficult, right? If you don't have all the guidance that a lot of other people get, right? For a lot of people, when they move out, they're moving out because they're going to school. They're moving out because they want to. They're moving out to be roommates with friends. And I don't know if anybody remembers, but most people, their parents are their, grocery store, their cupboards are, and that's where they go to do laundry. And that's, who's my doctor? Things like that, right? That people take for granted. And so youth, I think there's this stigma a lot of times with young people who are homeless that they're just bad kids that were running away because they don't want to deal with the rules of the house, which really is not that it doesn't exist, but it's such a small percentage of people that have just decided, I'm not following rules. No, nobody's like, I want to live outside forever. Even people that maybe at the time say they're making that decision, a lot of it's also based in negative things that are happening in the home, and a lot of it's people are leaving because of their own safety or emotional safety, psychological safety, and they don't really have options. And so it's not that they're making bad choices, it's just that they don't have a lot of options of choices to make. And so for young people, once you've become displaced and homeless, it's so hard because you're really starting from nothing. You don't have credit, you don't have landlord references, you probably don't have ID, you don't really know how to navigate this stuff, you don't have income, and it's hard to get income when you don't have a place to sleep and store your things. And so it overlaps with a lot of the experiences of adults who are homeless or experiencing homelessness, is that it's not as simple as just why don't you just go get a place? And then beyond that, so once, say, everyone's pretty different, right? They'll be very organized. They just need a very light touch and just a little support in system navigation, all the way up to people who, have been displaced for a very long time, have not had the privilege and opportunity to have a family base or a caretaking base to teach them all sorts of life skills, and who've been living on the streets, out of touch with service, and have complex co-occurring needs. And so what's really important, and why I really love YOU and even just a lot of the services in our system, is that it gives a range of options for folks based on their level of need, because it's not a one size fits all solution. You can't just say, here's these two youth experiencing homelessness, here, you can both have an apartment, good luck, see you later. That's really not the end of it. For a lot of youth, once they are in housing, they're lonely, And it's scary to be in a quiet apartment all by yourself and you don't have anyone to talk to. And so I think it's really important that as like a system and as a service provider that you offer different housing options to people that go from like supportive group living to like semi-supported living, transitional housing, and independent housing, because everyone's needs are really different. And so no two young people, just like no two any other human beings, are exactly the same and they all have different needs. And so what I like about the services, at least a lot of the services that are available, is that it's a pretty good range. Well, wish we had more of them, but it's a pretty good range that can meet needs, because it's not just like a housing need, it's also a social need. And like Andrea had touched on, like a sense of home, a sense of family, and who you are in relation to community as your identity develops as a young person. There's a lot of exploring and growth to do while you're also trying to manage a household that can be difficult for anyone to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That was very insightful. A lot of information there. I'm wondering, if at any point anyone else on the panel wants to even speak to, youth are not youth forever. They become adults who also have potentially these issues as well. So, the curiosity around understanding how many people in their adulthood also were youth that had challenges of homelessness, or some of the issues that you spoke to about not knowing how to navigate a system. Elizabeth, can we dig in and see what sorts of things you'd like to share around, some of the things you've just heard from the other panelists, and as it relates to women who are in abusive situations, whether that's emotional, physical, any sort of abuse that you sort of oversee with your community there?
Yeah, so many themes are resonating, especially with the youth. And I think that women and their children, the intergenerational piece of it can be kind of understood, that sometimes, like, to solve the problem of homelessness and intergenerational and chronic homelessness, is we really need to meet the needs of women and families who have experienced domestic violence, to stop the cycle and ensure that they have the supports and the housing, the safe, affordable housing that they need. So yeah, it's interesting how they connect. But I think in terms of, violence is, for women, the key kind of entryway into homelessness. And it's very much underestimated and undercounted. So a lot of like homelessness services and responses are very male-centric responses. And it can be difficult to see women's homelessness. Numbers in our community, often that's happening on the street or in shelters, but a lot of women are, couch surfing, staying with family, in violence against women shelter, which I don't think that's included in counts. And so it's their numbers are just not being counted. Also, if you're trying to get a referral to a Housing First program or a rapid rehousing program, typically referrals are happening through outreach teams on the street or in shelters. So, and for women, especially women with children, they're not going to access some of those homelessness sector responses or shelters because of safety issues, but also because, that could compromise custody of their children. So they're not being counted. It's underestimated vastly. There's like every other, population, there's just a profound lack of affordable housing. There are, special priority that women can get help applying for, but still the wait times are very long and there are barriers. So sometimes things like emotional abuse or even sexual violence are not seen as, reason enough to accept somebody's special priority status. So those are troubling barriers that women are experiencing when they're trying to find housing. And so when they're not able to, and then they have to go to very male-centric homelessness services, often those are not equipped, the staff are not equipped. And I know, working in a housing first agency when I was a housing stability worker, you know, when women who are experiencing intimate partner violence were coming for help, I just was not knowledgeable enough to be able to do a really strong safety plan like I am now, you know, in the role that I'm in. So yeah, so those are difficult barriers. And the link between violence against women and homelessness and housing need is really well established, well researched, generally accepted, but still we don't have the collaboration and the connection between the homeless and housing sectors and the VAW sector. And that's something that we really need to change as well. Yeah, so there's multiple barriers, and I think what we really need is this big systems change and a strong foundation across sectors to meet the needs of women and their children when they're fleeing domestic violence. And we need more quick responses. So when women are leaving, what they need is financial assistance. They need more things like portable housing supplements, because they need to be able to find safe, affordable housing of their choosing. You know, sometimes where their abuser will not, it's a secret location, and they need to make that switch from their current housing to somewhere safe very quickly, also with trafficking as well. So we need really nimble responses, quick responses. We need more financial assistance. We need more units for women in social housing, less barriers, and yeah, and just more system collaboration.
Thank you. Before our next set of questions, a number of you brought up, you know, the importance of collaboration. Maybe today you've heard from someone else on the panel that you're thinking, we should really have a conversation about this and see what we can do. So as we're going through the next set of questions, if you have a question as a panelist for another panelist, or just something that you want to bring out, you know, it's great for us to even hear the dialogue that you would talk about amongst yourselves. Today, in many ways, it's a beginning, a deepening of a community effort to understand before we can do something effective. I know a lot of times, even from a colonial perspective, we have this this initial, I'm going to change it, I'm going to save someone, I'm going to do something, but we have no idea how we got to the problem in the first place. And so part of today was to get us to better understand how are we in this place today, and what are the proper ways that we can move forward where we're not leading from our own sense of self or understanding or experience, but really truly meeting people where they are and what they need for themselves by their own decision making. I'd like to hear from everyone about one thing that you would really like audience members to go away with remembering, whether it's a statistic, a fact, some sort of information or learning, and also maybe one thing that we can tangibly do. And it can relate to your area of expertise, or just something that's maybe stuck with you or you've seen be effective. I mean, Allison, when you talked about, you know, making a friend of someone, right? Like that is huge. That is something that, you know, maybe not everyone here can do, but some of us can, and that I think can be very transformational, especially as a community. So, you know, if you would all like to share something that we can do, and maybe, you know, we can go into it in a different way. Andrea, I would like to start with you. You talked about the importance of these initiatives being led by Indigenous people, right? And I'm wondering, as a non-Indigenous person, where is the place for me to help? Is there a place for me to help? Or like, so where do non-Indigenous people play a role in helping Indigenous people find their sense of home or a sense of community? Is there a place for us? And if so, what is that?
I think that's for y'all to figure out. I don't know if I have the answer for that. I think, you know, we do a lot of the work on trying to figure out Indigenous-led solutions to our community. And I can tell you that it's a struggle every step of the way, because there's not a lot of mainstream acceptance for Indigenous worldviews and values, because there's a history of colonization that has tried to actively suppress those worldviews. And so I would put that back to perhaps any people who identify as settlers to maybe answer that question.
I, as a settler and as a racialized minority in London, Ontario, would say that people who are not from a racialized minority group have power, have privilege, and that it is upon you to leverage that to say in spaces where you're looking around and knowing that, oh, wait a second, there's not an Andrea here. There's not another Indigenous person talking about that perspective and how important it is and how it's foundational. And to put yourself out there and to make it uncomfortable for yourself, to put yourself out there, to have that conversation so that's not always on racialized and BIPOC folk to do that already at a great expense, an emotional expense to just living in this world. So whatever power you have, whatever you working at the Hive, Jenna, and your position is to be like, no, we need more Indigenous people talking about this. They need to be at this table. They need paid positions and positions of power to start taking their lived experience and their perspective and integrating it into policy and practice. I'm all for these like really small moments of like person to person stuff too, but we are not going to dismantle colonialism and racism by like glad handing each other. Like we need to like really dismantle this, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and welcome to that uncomfortability.
I love it. Since you have the floor, did you want to add anything else to make us uncomfortable, to add to our opening up and our, I'm trying to think of some of the fun words that you had in your bio, but
agitate.
Yes,
yeah, and
agitate us.
So there's this propensity to like love these other cultures that we're not a part of, and then in a moment of realizing that some of the beauty of those cultures that we love is part of struggle and is part of literally death, the active erasure and murdering of people. And so I think a beautiful thing to do is to like learn more about those cultures and make yourself uncomfortable with things and challenge yourself on narratives around what do I think trans people are. There's an idea of what that is. There's a narrative, and not everyone is fucking Caitlyn Jenner. Sorry for swearing. And to challenge yourself about what it means for homelessness, what it means for people. What do I think of people in homelessness? Because they're not people, they're not homeless, they're human beings, and they have community, they have connection as well, and it just lives outside of the idea of what you think is normal life, so challenge what you think is normal. Have those difficult questions within yourself, because it's going to give you an opportunity of realizing that this world is freaking beautiful and so diverse, and there's so much more we can learn from each other, and we all have so much more to give.
Beautiful, thank you. Sarah, what is something that you would like attendees to take away, to remember, and also something that they could actively do?
I'm going to go off of Athena's statement. Remember that those that you interact with, that you come across every day in your travels, they're human beings, right? They are unique, and show them kindness and compassion and understanding, and help them if you can, or just say hello. I mean, a smile goes a long way in that. And kind of Michelle was speaking to kind of the way she was treated when she was homeless and living on the streets and those types of things. Treat people with dignity. Treat them like you would want your mother, your brother, your sister, your father that's walking through those doors for the first time. Treat them like that. Remember that. And what I think that anyone could give back, I mean, first and foremost is, I mean, we have to make some systematic changes, right? There's, Jeff has spoken to kind of, there's policy, like there's problems in policy, there's real systematic changes that need to happen. So working together and having events like this, or listening and joining and adding your voice in is important. And we need more supports in community to keep people successfully housed, right? It's just, there needs to be more of these touch points before they end up homeless, or how do we quickly divert them from emergency shelter to help them find their home? A home is not just four walls and a roof, right? I mean, you just can't put people in homes and expect them to be successful. Some people will need supports. So we need to be able to build that, and we need to advocate for more of that in our community.
Thank you. So, I mean, systems is a big part of this. We can have, again, like was mentioned, conversations one-on-one, but I do know that there's a couple of organizations that, their staff are here today. And anyone, this is open to anyone on the panel, are there things that can be done within organizations, within workplaces or community groups that specifically can help to further the needs of our homeless populations in all the various ways that we've talked about them today? Anything that kind of comes to mind that you can kind of give to these groups to go away and discuss or work on themselves?
With their social media, Instagram is always a great surface level. Here I can delve in and find out local grassroots agencies, because there's such importance that you can see even with 519. Grassroots, the issue is that they're less constrained by the societal legislation and structures of how to behave and how to act and how to do their support work. So it's generally informed by the people who needed those services. So from my perspective as like a queer BIPOC person, I volunteer with Queer Events, which is a queer Black-led organization or queer network. Also within the City of London, they have their community inclusion and diversity councils, which are volunteer, but have informed the new diversity and inclusion panel or task force that they're having that will be in the City of London, which is to inform around accessibility, around Indigenous issues, around Black issues, around LGBT issues. So their panels and committees all volunteer run for people to give their input, and also you can learn while giving your input as well, right? Contributing to any of the agencies that are a part that were on this panel, but also doing your own work. I remember back in the day, London used to have this passport thing where we go to each like community cultural center in London. I miss those days. And you'd eat the food and eat and be around people of that culture. And that's, I think, something we need to do about like the services and the communities. Because even growing up in London and being Black, I didn't see Black people until it was Sunfest. I'm like, where are you? Where are you? So there's a lot of isolation, just like the homeless population feels, just like the transgender population feels. When you're a minority, you feel isolated. So feeling a part of that community, which is only going to better our situations and counteract the symptoms of colonization and racism, which is homelessness, which is lack of access, So that's my suggestion. Also, my name is Anthea. It's important. My name is Anthea, not Athena. She's an amazing goddess, but my name is Anthea.
Thank you. So hopefully people are taking notes from your wisdom. Elizabeth, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just to add to that, a lot of services and supports in London are really siloed, and yeah, I think us as staff and workers need to find ways to connect with each other. And I think that even as a feminist-based women's agency, we're conscious of the fact that we need to consider and be more inclusive in terms of gender diversity in what we do. So I think that like the connections between us are super important, and it's just good to talk, have opportunity, because we don't have a lot of opportunities to connect. So it's exciting.
Great. Jeff, is there a message that you want to send away with people? Anything that you think we can do as a takeaway, whether it's for individuals or organizations, businesses?
Yeah. I'm sort of so energized by the conversation. It's hard to kind of collapse it down, but I think what I would like to share when it comes to disability is we have this idea of disability as an occurrence and as a binary, right? That there are disabled people and there are non-disabled people, and these are the two categories. And you transition from being non-disabled, and then you become disabled, and now you're over here in this pile. That is, of course, not a reality. It is a lovely myth that we tell ourselves to try and hold on to our sense of normalcy, to believe that we're okay, that we're normal, and to push away the other of disability. But it's a fool's errand in some ways to try and cling to a sense of normalcy that doesn't really exist. And to realize that the disabled population is the biggest minority in the world. We are number one because disability transcends pretty much every demographic category there is in the world. If you are not already disabled, you will join us. We are coming for you, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. You will be disabled at some point. And when you do become disabled, you are going to welcome or be welcomed into a community of people that have transcended to the other side, which is to realize that it is actually the differences of the disabled or the human body. It is our fragility that actually binds us together, that brings us together into communities, that makes us do better things, because we are not single solitary individuals. And I would say, so I think on the one hand, we need to remember that disabled people are not this separate group, but rather they are all of us, and we will all need and desire supports in some way at some point. And I think last but not least, for anyone that's listening today, right now, who have felt the shame of disability, who have been ashamed of the ways that their bodies are thought to be different, are seen as different, or thought as dysfunctional or invalid, I feel that. We've all felt that. Disabled people have been forced to endure that for a very long time, but I'm here to say that you are not the problem. Your bodies, your minds are not the thing that is wrong, but rather it is the ways in which we have built a world that presumes that there is a perfect, right, correct, eugenic kind of person that should exist. That is actually the real problem that we need to attack. So embrace that difference, embrace the ways in which you are a flawed, fragile, vulnerable person, because that's actually what I think makes you a really, really good person. And if you want to talk about that, find me, let's talk about it, and let's be disabled together.
That was really beautiful. I just want to let that kind of sit with everybody for a moment in the discomfort, because that was really important what you just shared. Thank you so much. Allison, what would you like us to go away with, remembering, and maybe something that we can do?
I think a lot of us on the panel today have brought up a lot of kind of answers to people's understanding of homelessness and why our friends in the community are where they are. I personally, I've been a security guard in the city for 10 years, so often I was the voice of exclusion. And it really bothered me to a point where I wanted to figure out what could be done or how I could help bridge gaps along with our whole entire organization. I think that as a community, we should start to look within ourselves of how, when we leave our homes and we're in public, just how we kind of approach other people in situations, and how we can look within and think, maybe somebody is acting the way they are because they're having a bad day, or maybe, whatever it could be, just showing up as kind of a person with an open mind, and just to say hello and start a conversation there could change a lot of people's days. I know for me personally, I come from a small town of Four Corners, so I wasn't exposed to homelessness until I came to school in London for college. And it really kind of blew my mind how many folks were living this way, and that I had never even knew about it in the world. From that, it really drove me to become more educated and understanding. And it helped me gain a lot of patience, to just sit with folks and just have no agenda, no timeline, and just be there and listen. From that alone, I learned a lot, and we were able to take that and kind of teach other people comfortably to go out into the community and connect with these folks. And just starting with friendship and allowing people back into our community who are facing homelessness is huge, in the sense of we're facing a housing crisis right now, and a lot of our friends are sitting on the sidewalk waiting for that 3 years to come up and somebody to say, you know what, we finally found your name, you're at the top of the list. But they just spent 3 years of kind of social discrimination, people walking by them, judging them because they're homeless, instead of looking at them and saying, you know what, I recognize that you didn't get to go to your dresser drawer this morning and pull out brand new clothes, and you didn't get to have a shower, and you didn't sleep in a comfortable bed, and you might be going through 100 different things at once right now, but I'm going to sit down with you and just pause the world and pause the time. And if you need food or a coffee or a drink, I'm going to ask you what you'd like, instead of, going into a store and saying, I'm going to buy a meal and I'm going to drop it off to this person sitting outside the door, and I'm going to go on with my day because I'm helping them out. Whereas starting with a conversation and learning, you know, folks have dietary needs, they can't eat certain things, they might not even like what you're offering, and it might turn into kind of an insult that you think that they needed that at that time instead of just asking. It might just be that they just needed you to say hello. So one thing that I like to say, and we shared at the Pillar Nonprofit Awards, is that when you go into the community and you want to offer change, you reach into your pocket and offer friendship, because that's kind of the quickest way, rather than looking within and saying, you know, I don't have money to support this person right now, or I don't have $1 to give you, so I'm going to keep walking. That simple hello or the sharing of information could really go a long way. For example, overnight we were hit with a pandemic. Overnight doors were closing. Overnight there wasn't kind of places that I could walk in and get a hot meal, which is where our organization kind of stepped up and started to deliver these meals directly to folks. Most of us have a phone or a computer or access to internet, and we're getting information quick. These folks are just out there. If nobody's talking to them, or they don't have the opportunity to come together in community centers or churches and shelter services, they might be completely missing out of what our society is doing and advancing, and that could push them back even further in their kind of pathway back to housing.
Great. Thank you so much. That's such important information in one place to start that I think that we all are capable of. We are all capable of being kind and asking someone a simple question about themselves and getting to know them. And I think that that allows some people who wonder, like, maybe I don't have money, maybe I don't have access to additional resources, or I can't invite someone to my house to give them a shower, but I can ask them how they're doing and check in with them as a human. Thank you. Lena, anything that you want to offer for people to take away, things that we can do? You gave such a great kind of overview of the challenges that youth have, things from how do I navigate this world I've never been in before? How do I access cards and information? Are there other things that you want us to go away with remembering, and things that we can do if we do see someone, you know, in that younger age range and they're in need of help? What's something that we can do?
Sure, thanks. I think just along the lines of what Allison and Michelle had shared about, you know, not criminalizing people because they're experiencing homelessness or because they're currently of like reduced circumstances, really. And so when you see a young person or young people on the street, don't assume that they're congregated together and that it's like a threat or that they're there to like intimidate you. Honestly, they're there in a group to feel more safe because they are actually statistically way more likely to be the victim of a crime than the perpetrators of the crime. And so, you know, and if you see it like a young person or young people somewhere, and they seem like they're struggling to do something like at Service Ontario, all the things that everyone as an adult also finds frustrating, but has developed these skills to like manage frustration or have a higher frustration threshold. It's so much more helpful to just ask them if they need a little help. Or like people have said, like maybe they haven't eaten. I get pretty cranky and miserable if I haven't eaten and then have to stand in a 40-person line. You know, and so just like remembering that like people are young, and so sometimes it's a matter that they just need like a little bit of a helping hand, just to ask them if they don't need your help, like leave them alone. But if they say, oh yeah, yes, that would be great. Sometimes that's what it takes. And just, I think a lot of times people see folks who are like living outdoors or who are homeless, and they see what looks like a wild behavior, but people take for granted the luxury that housed people have of privacy. And so people who are housed have the luxury of privacy that when you're having a bad day, you have a pillow to scream into, you have a place to like stomp your feet and cry and like do whatever you need to do that if you needed to do it on the sidewalk because you didn't have privacy, people would be filming you, judging you, calling the police on you, all sorts of things, when really these are all things that lots of people do with the luxury of the privacy of their home. And then the second part, I think, that is good for everyone, everyone, is to truly know your rights related to housing and tenancy. I think that that's a part that sometimes gets omitted, because even lots of people who rent take for granted what they think are their rights or what they think are the laws. And I think just like information and knowledge is power, right? And so one way to help people experiencing homelessness, or to prevent people from experiencing homelessness, is for everybody, but especially for service providers, to become informed, educated, and knowledgeable about the laws and the rights and the responsibilities of tenancy, of landlords, of like what people can and can't do, of what is or isn't against the Residential Tenancies Act. And then for people to come together, like there's a really great group on Facebook, the London Tenants Association, where people can consult with peers, but they can also connect with neighborhood legal services. And then there's groups like Acorn that are coming, and they work with people to just have community advocacy and access to information. And like Allison had said, a lot of folks don't have, again, the luxuries of like immediate access to technology that everyone takes for granted. And so they, like, you know, people with the power dynamics between landlords and tenants, the landlord, you know, you get the 1970s nail in your door with a handwritten eviction notice, and people say, oh my gosh, I'm evicted, I have to leave, when really, if people could share with them more information about like the legalities around actually being evicted and the landlord's responsibilities and housing standards, then it really empowers people to know what they can and can't do, and what their landlord can and can't do, and what their rights are. Because really the Residential Tenancies Act is supposed to be designed to support tenants and protect tenants. And unfortunately, because of like the gap in information, the gap in knowledge, a lot of people are sort of bamboozled out of their housing, especially in like a super hot real estate market that we have right now. And so I would say that, yeah, like the best thing any service provider can do is become knowledgeable about the rights that people have related to housing, because the best way to like help to start is to prevent people from losing their housing, but it also helps people to maintain housing like once it's been achieved.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Acorn was one of those resources you mentioned, and what was the first one?
There's a London Tenants Association group on Facebook, but also I always promote neighborhood legal services, really nice folks, very, very helpful, very patient, really great folks. They're pretty passionate about defending and supporting tenants, especially if there's any type of like wrongdoing on the part, or you know, like a bad faith type of eviction. And so I found that they're really great. They also offer free training to anybody, educational webinars and stuff like that. So they're really, really great. Highly recommended. One of the really fun things that you learn in a lot of like housing first type of training is that they point out that in social services, you never learn about real estate, you never learn about housing, you never learn about all these skills. And so it's sort of funny to assume that people who are struggling and having to focus on eating, sleeping, shelter are also going to have just like the mental bandwidth to navigate all of that and learn all that at the same time that they're really working to actually just like physically survive. And so our job as service providers is to like be that link and be that support, right? And help them meet some of those needs, but also to just like take some of the load on that, and to like support them in making sure that like their rights aren't being perpetually violated in life.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Michelle, before we get to you, if anyone has a question from the audience, if you want to put it in the chat or in the question and answer box, please specify who the question is for, and if you want it for all panelists, you can mention that as well, or maybe there's a couple that kind of can speak to the same point. Michelle, is there something that you want everyone to go away with remembering, and something that you think that we could all do to have more compassion, to have more involvement in making the lives of those who are going through these challenges easier, and whether that's for individuals, organizations, companies, anything that kind of comes to mind?
I think everybody's made a lot of really good points, and I would just say to go along with what Sarah and Allison and Alina said, just to start that conversation, right? Please just start that conversation. So,
Great.
thanks.
Thank you. Danielle, did you want to navigate our questions in the box there? I can help you if you need any help.
So I can see the chat, but I can't see into the Q&A box. And it seems like our awesome panelists are kind of answering some of the questions as they're in the discussion.
Okay. I have a question here. So the question is, in your opinion, do you believe the fast-moving trend of gentrifying low-income neighborhoods or communities and cities that have a large population of people experiencing homelessness play a role in hiding or camouflaging these parts? And do you believe this helps push the agenda of citizens or politicians that vote against budget raises, low-income housing, and other important building blocks? Because, let me just, hold on a second. I'm just going to pause. Let's see. Sorry, I was just getting some.
Michelle's mic is on.
Okay, I just muted it. I'm just going to try and break this question down a little bit. Okay, actually, Danielle, if I copy and paste this to you, can you maybe break that down a little bit, and I'll go on to the next one.
Okay. So it looks like this is to all panelists. In your opinion, do you believe that the fast-moving trend of glorifying low-income neighborhoods or communities, cities that have a large population of people experiencing homelessness play a role in hiding or camouflaging these parts? So I'd say that's probably the first part of the question. And then it goes into some more about pushing agenda of citizens or politicians that vote against budget raises. So yeah, again, the first part of that I would focus on. So in your opinion, do you believe that the fast moving trend of gentrifying low-income neighborhoods or communities have have an impact on the homeless community, essentially?
Yeah, that's the reason why gentrifying happens. It's because, I mean, it's one of the things I was talking about, like the legislative and structural ways in which colonization and racism has happened. So what happened back in the day, quick history lesson, is what would happen is like designated areas would be undesirable. And then legislatively, that would be created through banking and mortgage rates. Those would be the areas in which racialized people, the other, would be funneled to. But then what happens is that, you know, the community grows, the city grows, and those places that were undesirable become property-wise valuable places because they are usually generally centered in the city centers. So now, and then so through gentrification, there's like these main little identifiers that you'll find, which is just like certain kinds of shops, certain kinds of socioeconomic couples. So a large indicator of gentrification is gay white men, just because social economically capital wise, they signify a more wealthy but othered wealthy coming into a neighborhood to gentrify. Of course, it negatively impacts the homeless population because generally in those areas, in those neighborhoods, there was a lot of social services that were clumped in areas and because there was undesirables there, property values were lower. So just like the old East Village, I remember when I first got an apartment here, it was like $500 for a 1-bedroom apartment. I have just been recently displaced 3 times in my last apartments because my landlords are raising the rent. That's what happens. And I'm not homeless. I am, like, by all standards well off in the sense that I have well-paying jobs and I'm university educated, but I can't live in the neighborhood in which I work. So yes, it negatively affects everybody.
Anyone else want to speak to that?
That property and land is increasingly, and housing is increasingly becoming commodified, and municipalities own less properties and land within our cities, which is a problem. And then things like Airbnb and large property management companies come in, and so we have rising rental rates. So those are all forces that I feel we need to call for action to diminish and regulate their power.
I think to Adia's point, that often the gentrifiers are not disabled people. And even more frustrating is when gentrification happens and the changes that are made to the physical space are changes that are made along aesthetic desires of non-disabled people. When I was living downtown, I remember when the Booster Juice moves into the what was and will always be the Galleria Mall. When the Booster Juice moves in, and they put a flight of stairs inside an accessible mall, and it's like, why is this happening? And why is it happening? Because the people that have the money, the people that are able to start to gentrify and move into these areas, also are looking for, their cute little boutiques. And those cute little boutiques should be walk-ups because that's the aesthetic that they're into at the moment. And ramps are ugly and should be at the back of the building by the garbage disposal, generally speaking. And so I think that as people are being moved around the city, we also are continuing to then collapse disabled populations of mental health into these ever increasingly smaller buckets of places that are remaining accessible and only remaining accessible because those with the money, the power, and the authority, meaning probably very well educated, probably high paying jobs, and therefore probably not disabled, or at least not in a profound way, are the ones that are reconfiguring the world and pushing the rest of us kind of out.
Very insightful. Andrea, did you want to speak to anything? I mean, we're talking about land here being made to, work for a very colonial setting already. Is there anything that's kind of coming up for you that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think that for not only Indigenous people who are experiencing homelessness, but us as an Indigenous agency as well, access to land is a huge issue. It's with operating our resting space out of a hotel, we can't smudge. We don't have any discretion over how to use our space in that way, and so it can be really difficult for Indigenous peoples to utilize traditional healing methods, or how do we do ceremony here in the city. It's very difficult, especially for folks experiencing homelessness or without vehicles or transportation. When there's ceremonies on one of the local First Nations, it's a huge issue. Also, with respect to homelessness here in the city, there are forms of treaties that have been in place since London has been established. And one of the things that came up when we were doing the community engagement for the Giwatashkat Indigenous Homelessness Plan is access to the river, which has always been, which was promised in those treaties. And we heard from folks experiencing homelessness again and again, how encampments become removed. And so it raises a really big question on how those treaty relationships continue to unfold for Indigenous people experiencing homelessness in particular, many of whom were actually spoke to being caretakers of the river and would clean up sharps down by the river or trash and things like that, which are actually caretaking activities and a form of relationship with land. So I think, yeah, there was a lot coming up for me there around access to land and to the river that has been enshrined through some very long-standing relationships to which the obligations have not been fulfilled.
Great, thank you. It's very fitting. The next comment is, give Indigenous people their land back. If you can buy land, give it to an Indigenous community. So I guess we could vote on that. Everyone says yes, and we'll see what we can do. I would love to know any opportunities for the public to get involved and what kinds of things would be helpful to you and your organizations. I know COVID has made challenges for organizations to take on volunteers. Are there currently volunteer opportunities available? Yeah, I've wondered that myself too. So probably everyone's had to adapt a little bit to how their volunteer services have been. Are there online opportunities for people who maybe can't physically come in, or anything else that people can do in a volunteer capacity or needs capacity?
I think, again, all the agencies that I talked about or any of the grassroots stuff, unfortunately, we live in a capitalist world. So any of that back end can do fundraisers because people need money for shit. We need money for food programs. We need money for support services, for legal supports, for therapy, for anything, you know? So yeah, that money is important. Leveraging your power in the community. Do you know realtors? Do they want to donate space? Alohemwing needs space. Unity needs space. All these agencies and people need spaces, right? So yeah, put your money where your mouth is.
Thank you.
I'd like to second that. We do a lot of fundraising for our organization and grant writing and stuff, but we recently had a hotel accommodation stay program, which was really amazing and really badly needed, but that had to come to an end because our funding ran out. So we are, yeah, money is always extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to speak to the volunteer opportunities?
I can touch base on 509 Pursuit. We've been slowing down onboarding folks, but we are looking forward to onboard more for our outreach and our Better Days events leading into the summer, hoping that we are able to open up more. You can head to our website, www.509pursuit.ca, and fill out a form there, and we'll get back to you on email when we're ready to onboard.
Thank you. And I mean, volunteering, Anthea, you gave a good point, right? Like counseling. So maybe there's people who can even offer their own services, right? Maybe they don't have the funding or they want to give the gift that they have themselves. So if anyone wants to speak to those sorts of things that people need that maybe as an agency you need, but you can't afford, could you bring on counselors who are willing to offer some time or any other services that might be in need, whether that's healing services or massage or therapy or, I mean, so many different things. Anything that's kind of coming to mind there that people could offer their time for. Yeah, Lena.
So if people are like, I think sometimes it's hard to necessarily ask for agencies to necessarily ask folks to volunteer because sometimes the nature of volunteering is kind of like a one-time thing or this. And so, you know, sometimes you don't necessarily want to expect participants or clients to open up and tell their whole story to people who like aren't really a permanent thing. Because I think for a lot of people, I know especially for youth, there's a lot of trauma related to like attachment and then sudden like ripping these relationships away and just the temporary nature sometimes of relationships. So I would say like if someone's looking to volunteer, everyone loves a long-standing volunteer that can be consistent and committed in their time. And if you want to do more of kind of like, I really want to do something, I can't commit a ton of time, it's great to reach out when there's events being held. So like when people, I know YOU hosts a breakfast every year, and I know like the Pillar nonprofit takes volunteers and United Way takes volunteers to do things. And so to go to some of those, the funding agencies and volunteer is so great because you can offer like shorter term volunteer services to them, which is amazing. And then like if people want to donate money, everybody could use money. Or gift cards, even if you're not comfortable doing cash or check, really like $5 Tim cards are amazing. Like give someone a $5 Tim card give an agency a bunch of TIM cards, give bus tickets. These are things that help reduce some of the barriers, right? Someone can grab a meal before they need to do something. Someone can get where they need to go. You can cash in the bus tickets if you need cash. You know, there's a lot of things that people could use. And then when you're donating things, it's always nice if they're new or nearly new, stuff that you'd like to get. Because I know sometimes people are like, oh, I have like 95 mugs. I just want to give these 95 mugs. And don't get me wrong, people like mugs, but people like coffee to put in them even more than the mugs. And so sometimes it's just thinking about like what's really useful for someone that maybe doesn't have a cupboard to keep stuff in, right? Like what's helpful for people that maybe don't have like the opportunity to like have large things, but like what can they use in the moment? What are things that like places don't get a lot of funding for but really could use? Is some of those little incidentals like bus tickets, grocery gift cards, Dollarama gift cards. You can buy stuff like basic needs things, and it gives people a bit of freedom of choice, which is really nice and empowering, rather than just like, here is like Allison was saying, like when they get donations, it's so much nicer to be able to say, here's things that I know you would love, rather than, you know, they say, do you have underwear? And you're like, we only have like extra small. Does that work? You could go, like they could go to Dollarama and grab something that actually fits for.
Awesome. Those were great points there. Is there, is anyone else thinking of things like when you mentioned, you know, 45 mugs or however many mugs, like, are there other things that we as the public are doing that are not helpful, that actually maybe create even more work for you? For anyone on the panel where it's, you know, we think we're getting it right, but maybe it's, we're missing something there, like we're missing the coffee versus the mugs.
I can touch a little bit on that, following up with Lena. We run kind of a donation center. That's how we started. And for a lot of folks, especially right now in the pandemic and being home, it's a great time to, you know, go through your cupboards and everything. Like she's saying, the 45 coffee mugs. Just be mindful of where you're donating and who you're donating to, because as much as you're going through your home and throwing everything in a garbage bag and saying, you know, I feel good, it's going to go to a second home, it might actually create more jobs for organizations that don't even have funding to have folks go through those donations and pick apart, you know, the things that we actually are needing. For example, like our program, we've recently redone our website to have examples of care packages. So you can actually go on our website and see things if you're not sure what household items would be great for somebody facing homelessness or somebody recently housed. And then I think starting there with the donation aspect is learning, you know, what day-to-day items, because folks might not understand that a lot of our friends live minimalist lifestyles. They're carrying their whole entire life in their backpack, on their back. They're constantly moving with it. That's why you see a lot of shopping carts and things, because those are those folks kind of exactly who they are. And the more that we try to onboard them because we think that they need these things, it could actually be negatively affecting their ability to go places or do the things that they need to do.
Awesome. Very helpful. Thank you. A question for Jeff. With the lack of accessible housing in the city specifically, are there resources available to try and locate the accessible units? Also was wondering what steps can be taken to address that some accessible units are not actually fully accessible. My partner is physically disabled and able to advocate for himself and is not limited with funding, but that is very different for our larger community.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think it points to some of the real gaps when it comes to finding accessible housing for people. There aren't a lot of great programs. I know the March of Dimes, for instance, has a home renovation fund, but again, generally speaking, you need to own if you're going to be able to do that. And you know, there aren't a whole lot of people in this world that can afford a $600,000 house right now in London. And so, so that's a bit of an issue. I always am a big supporter of service organizations. They have been a great help to many people with disabilities. Even if they don't specifically call themselves a disability organization, I'm thinking of things like Rotary and Kingsman. These are clubs that are obviously very stretched, but they are organizations that help disabled people to be able to get access to the types of equipment and things that they might need. In terms of the accessibility question, I think part of this is about shifting our understanding of design, and understanding that there is no such thing as a fully accessible unit. Many years ago, I was brought in by a hotel chain, a national hotel chain, who wanted to build basically an accessible hotel room. And they were realizing very quickly that there was just no means to build a room that was going to be accessible for every single person. The solution that they ended up taking on, which I think is a great idea, was to build a space that was basically fairly large, fairly flexible, and then they had basically like a closet that was full of various different accessible needs. So they had things like accessible phones, TTY phones. So if someone needed that, they could just bring it into the room. Portable, they have these things there. They kind of look like extended poles that you go sew into roof, and you can put grabs on them. So you can basically put a transfer pole anywhere in the room, having access to Hoyer lifts, these sorts of things. Like it becomes super, super diverse and complex because everyone's needs are going to be a little bit different. And so rather than trying to build one space that's fully accessible to every single person that will ever enter into that space, I think we need to turn it around a little bit and start to ask, how can we better communicate with people and ask them, what are the needs that you have? What are the things that will make your life a little bit easier? And then also believe in people when they tell you it. Understanding that people very, very, very rarely claim disability, being disabled in this world. And so if somebody says like, I just need more time to be able to move from point A to point B because I have a lack of dexterity or a lack of energy. I have bad days, I have good days. These aren't people trying to trick you. They're not people trying to cheat you. If you see somebody who is on the street and appears to have a disability, if your first instinct is they're lying about that to try and get some benefit, you need to look internally and be like, wow, that's a really messed up thing to think about somebody. Believe people. If they claim disabled status, believe them, and don't require a bloody doctor's note every time.
Thank you. So this will be the final question of the day, and then we can have some closing comments. I apologize if this was already discussed, but are there ways for the larger agencies with a focus on housing and housing first to become more diverse in their approaches to include the marginalized groups discussed today?
We have a wonderful coordinator here named Judy who would be happy to connect with any larger organizations. And we would love to, speak to the concerns of abused women and have connection and more collaboration with housing and homelessness sector services. And yeah, absolutely. I think I know that she would be able to speak very well to the lived experience of women and the challenges that they face, and to create more opportunities to listen to clients within those larger agencies, to women, and to listen to their expertise on their own lives, their challenges, the barriers, and to really think about, when it comes to women and housing, that safety needs to be at the center of every discussion. That's all I can think of.
Thank you.
I would love to, for people out there who don't know what the housing first kind of modality really is that it's kind of like harm reduction in the sense of no matter what else is going on in your life, whatever has led to the state of homelessness, the imperative is that you can't deal with any of that other shit if you don't have a home. And so the push is to try and break down all the barriers that are stopping you from having a home and give you a home so that you can deal with all the other things, which is beautiful on paper, but in practicality, all the other things that do contribute to you being homeless also have a contribution to whether or not you financially can afford housing, whether or not you have emotional, psychological supports to maintain that home. Do you have community relationships? Do you have family relationships? So I think that, yes, there's a lot of work that needs to be done with larger agencies, small agencies, intermediate agencies, with Housing First, but two, that realizing that again goes back to the situation that we're not talking about just homelessness. We're talking largely standing about the colonialistic systemic racism world that we have created. So we're doing band-aid solutions and incremental things to deal with larger issues. And so when we talk about these larger issues, we need to understand that the reference that we're using also informs the little things and the ways that Housing First practices have been developed. They're not in isolation. They're still influenced by colonization. They're still influenced by racism. So yeah, Elizabeth talked about like women's specific experience. The same thing goes for like marginalized folks. We're Indigenous folks. I'm trans. I don't know if this landlord's gonna treat me shittily. I, as a Black person, have brought my white mother to housing opportunities, knowing full well that if I'm not dealing with a racialized person, that they're gonna look to my mom and they're gonna feel more safe. And that's a way that I've leveraged my privilege of having a white mother to benefit me to counteract these systems. So yeah, Housing First, yeah, reducing all barriers. One of them is literally freaking ID. I'm sorry, our populations have difficulty having ID, keeping hold of ID, making those barriers easier to get that shit, or make it like not as important for that ID. Also too, like creating really good relationship with landlords. We do have a situation in the city where there's like tons of property management owners and we have a huge vacancy rate right now. Doesn't make any sense to us. We're like, we have all these homeless people and all these people who can't get housed, but I mean, that's not just because there's shitty landlords out there. It's the capitalist world and they're making money not even having people in those homes. So how do we create great relationships with these property managers so they're still making money, but they're still housing people and it's a safe scenario for them? How do we create economic and legislative ways in which trans people and racialized people can't be discriminated against because of other people's fear of them, or those who have mental health, or those who are substance involved? A lot of it, we didn't talk about these things that add to the stigma of the homeless population, and that a lot of it is, yeah, some have mental health issues, some of them are substance users, but that doesn't mean that they don't need to have a home. There are tons of people out there who have homes who use all kinds of substances and they just aren't marginalized, or the stigma isn't attached to them in the same ways. So we really have to do a lot of work around demystifying that and fighting those battles around that kind of stuff, around barriers and accessibility.
Great, thank you. We are 3 minutes to 3 o'clock, so I want to just give everyone a chance to sort of say some parting words, anything they want to share before we wrap up today. Andrea, we started with you today. Do you have any words to close us out?
I just want to express my gratitude for this discussion and everything that was contributed by all the awesome panelists. Somebody posed a question in the chat about where they can access the Giwatashkat Indigenous Homelessness Strategic Plan, and I posted a link. It's on the Atlosa website if anyone does want to read the full plan. But miigwech everybody, bamapi.
Thank you. Michelle, any final words you want to share with us today?
I just wanted to say thank you very much for letting me be a part of this. It was an incredible opportunity and experience. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Sarah, any parting words today?
Oh, just thank you for having me.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, and it's been such a good discussion. Very helpful to not feel so isolated. And just to let everyone know, LOC does have a resource room that's open for women to come in and use a computer and a phone if they need to. We also have urgent support times every afternoon from 1 till 4. So if a woman needs to come in to talk to a counselor advocate, do safety planning, talk about maybe doing an intake, we're happy to do that. And we are getting women in usually within about 2 weeks in for services and for counseling. So everyone's welcome, and please connect with us. We'd love to talk more.
Thank you. Lena.
Thank you so much for inviting me to do this. If you are working or know a young person that needs help with housing, needs help with basic needs, needs employment, needs education, really anything, we do have in-person offices that are open Monday to Friday, 10 to 6, down at 332 Richmond Street and 333 Richmond Street. We also have an emergency shelter for youth ages 16 to 25, like up to 25, at 585 Clark Road. So if someone's in need of immediate emergency shelter and they're a young person and maybe they're really not sure where to go, that is a great place to start. And if it's during the week, 10 to 6, Monday to Friday, send them down to the Youth Action Center, 332 Richmond Street, right at the corner of York and Richmond. There's a cafe, you can't miss it. Stop by.
Thank you. Allison, any final words?
I just wanted to say thank you for allowing not only myself, but Michelle to be here and share her story. And Michelle, thank you for always being you, and thank you for being a great friend. I want to thank the panelists here today, because not only did it help me, I'm sure it helped a lot of people in the community, and I'm hopeful that for our friends, we'll see some change.
Thank you. Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great. I'm definitely humbled to be sharing the screen with the panelists today. I feel a little out of my league for sure. Wonderful people. I think the only thing that I would share is as tough as these problems can seem, as big as the system can appear. Time and time again, we have seen that both individually and more importantly collectively, we can make radical changes to the world that we live in. We can make a world that is actually inclusive, that is inclusive for people, that takes care of people, that replaces power into the hands of people, as opposed to putting power in the hands of those at the top. So make that choice to individually and collectively work for things that maybe you don't need, but that you think are not just valid, but vital to be a part of our community.
Thank you so much. Anthea,
thank you.
Will you agitate us before we leave?
Well, firstly, I just wanted to say thank you for everyone who took time out of their day to talk about these issues, and also to have this platform to, be a visible representation for things that not often are, and everyone else who did that as well. It's freaking amazing and wonderful. And yeah, again, akin to what Jeff said, these things may seem very large, but they've been here for a while. But this panel in and of itself shows you that there's amazing people out here doing that work, and that we all can have a part in it, and to play and to combat these things. So thanks again.
Thank you. For the panelists who've been looking at your screen, check the chat box. There's some amazing supportive comments there, maybe some questions if you want to reach out to them. For all of our attendees, thank you so much for showing up to this. It's so important that it's not just a conversation in a small room between 10 people, but one that transcends the internet into the world that we live in. And I hope that you do reach out to those who have been with us today. Thank you to the panelists. Humbling is a great word. The information is definitely something to digest in a number of different ways, and I'm excited to see how we can explore doing more than just this. Coming into this conversation, not knowing much, I still realize I know so little, but I'm appreciative of that, and I hope that those at home are beginning to understand that understanding homelessness is not an end-all be-all, we've got the solution kind of situation, but that we're going to navigate it one person at a time and one set of needs at a time. So thank you everyone for showing up, and wishing you all the best in the rest of your day and the rest of your life until we meet again and cross paths. Thank you so much. Bye everybody.